On July 7, 2026, India secured a $630 million defense contract with Indonesia. This follows a $375 million agreement with the Philippines in 2022 and a $700 million deal with Vietnam confirmed in mid-2026. These nations are heavily expanding their defense budgets, but their procurement choice is an anomaly. Developing navies typically seek the most affordable hardware to maximize volume. The weapon system they are buying costs upwards of $4 million per unit. The system is the BrahMos, a jointly developed Indo-Russian cruise missile. It is engineered for multi-domain deployment, meaning the exact same missile family can be launched from land-based mobile batteries, surface ships, submarines, and fighter aircraft. The willingness of these ASEAN states to commit immense capital to a single premium platform points to a specific, urgent calculation in regional maritime defense. It signals India's transition from a massive arms importer into a supplier of high-end strategic hardware. To understand this market demand, we have to ask why nations with limited military budgets are selecting a costly Indo-Russian missile over cheaper domestic or Western alternatives. The answer lies in a military doctrine known as anti-access area denial, or A2AD. For a smaller military facing a larger, better-equipped adversary, A2AD is an equalizing strategy. The objective is not to control the ocean, but to make a specific maritime zone too lethal for an enemy fleet to enter. At a tactical level, this is known as the porcupine strategy. Instead of concentrating firepower on a few high-value ships, a nation disperses highly mobile, easily concealed missile batteries along its coastline. A land-based maritime strike capability allows a smaller state to threaten heavy carrier strike groups or amphibious assault ships up to 300 kilometers offshore. They project sea denial without the financial burden of building, manning, and protecting large naval fleets. By turning their coastlines into dispersed threat vectors, these nations make themselves mathematically difficult to target. The BrahMos directly fills this requirement for immediate land-based deterrence. This chart compares the unit cost of the systems these buyers are evaluating. The American Harpoon and the Russian Caliber sit well below the BrahMos, which commands between $3.5 and $4.9 million per missile. Standard legacy cruise missiles, like the Harpoon or Tomahawk, follow a subsonic flight profile. They cruise below the speed of sound, trading velocity for fuel efficiency and longer range. The Russian Caliber improves on this by using a dual-phase profile. It conserves fuel by flying subsonically for most of its journey, initiating a highly visible supersonic sprint only as it approaches the target. BrahMos's differentiator is sustained supersonic speed, Mach 2.8 through its entire flight path. It pairs this velocity with a terminal sea-skimming altitude to hide under the Earth's curvature. Breaking the radar horizon at Mach 3 gives adversary defense systems mere seconds to react. The high acquisition cost is a direct trade-off for physics. Buyers are paying a premium for a flight profile that mathematically limits the probability of a successful enemy intercept. Sustained supersonic capability is not new. The Indo-Russian joint venture was established in 1998. To understand the recent export surge, we have to look at the structural changes and operational triggers of the mid-2020s. The first enabler was legal. In 2016, India joined the Missile Technology Control Regime, or MTCR, a multilateral framework aimed at restricting the proliferation of heavy, long-range delivery systems. As a member, India was no longer subject to the strict 300-kilometer range ceiling. This accession provided the legal cover to market the weapon globally, allowing domestic manufacturing to confidently scale capacity toward 150 missiles per year. The second catalyst was proof of delivery. When the Philippines received its first coastal batteries in early 2024, it removed the first-mover hesitation for neighboring states. It proved India could successfully execute a complex, bundled export contract. The decisive turning point arrived in May 2025 during Operation Sindoor, a brief border conflict where Indian forces reportedly fired roughly 15 to 19 BrahMos missiles operationally against air bases. In the international arms trade, there is a massive psychological and commercial gap between a missile that performs well on a test range and one that has been successfully deployed in a live combat environment. Following Operation Sindoor, the BrahMos was reclassified in the market from a theoretical deterrent to a combat-validated asset, accelerating the timelines for the Vietnam and Indonesia procurements. However, portraying any platform as an unstoppable silver bullet ignores the realities of modern warfare and the limitations of the hardware itself. The BrahMos is entirely dependent on external intelligence. To utilize the missile, a buyer must possess their own robust command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance network, often referred to as C4ISR. A 300-kilometer range is tactically useless if a navy lacks over-the-horizon radar, drones, or satellite infrastructure to track the target ship. Furthermore, modern layered air defense architectures utilizing long-range early warning systems and advanced interceptors, like the American SM-6 or Russian S-400, possess the engagement geometry to plausibly defeat the threat, especially if multiple missiles are not launched simultaneously to overwhelm the defense. India's export success has also generated an immediate geopolitical reaction. The introduction of premium strike capabilities into a region consistently forces adversaries to acquire matching technology. By May 2026, Pakistan publicly unveiled the Fateh-3. Assessed as a localized derivative of a Chinese supersonic system, it was explicitly developed and marketed as a direct countermeasure to the BrahMos. India's deployment and export of supersonic cruise technology has forced rival nations to actively procure equivalent systems, permanently raising the destructive baseline of regional conflicts. The government in New Delhi has leveraged these recent successes to set an aggressive macro objective, scaling total defense exports to 50,000 crore rupees, roughly $6 billion, annually by 2029. This ambition requires context. According to 2025 SIPRI data, the top 5 suppliers, led by the US, France, and Russia, control 70% of the global arms trade. Despite 62% growth in defense exports, India currently does not rank among the top 25 suppliers. The domestic manufacturing base also faces structural bottlenecks. The majority of high-value defense contracts are still allocated to defense public sector undertakings, state-owned enterprises, which limits the development of a broad, highly competitive private manufacturing ecosystem necessary for rapid scale. The multi-million-dollar contracts with ASEAN states are clear validation of India's engineering capacity, but its overall market footprint remains small and constrained compared to entrenched historical suppliers. For India, the value of these deals extends beyond the immediate revenue. Selling a major weapons platform initiates a decades-long relationship. It bundles maintenance, spare parts, life cycle upgrades, and technical training, tightly linking the buyer's defense readiness to New Delhi. But the hardware carries latent diplomatic risks. Because the BrahMos is co-developed with NPO Mashinostroyenia, a sanctioned Russian entity, it exposes buyers to the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA, risking secondary penalties from the US. India is navigating this while operating outside the primary international normative framework. It abstained from the Global Arms Trade Treaty in 2014 and therefore legally bypasses the treaty's requirement to assess arms transfers against international humanitarian risk. Domestically, the Defense Production and Export Promotion Policy, the primary governance architecture meant to manage this massive global push, has remained an unfinalized draft since 2020. Ultimately, the contracts in Jakarta, Hanoi, and Manila represent the physical manifestation of India's Act East diplomacy. They provide vulnerable nations with a formidable layer of coastal deterrence. By supplying the hardware for regional sea denial, India is actively shedding its historical posture as a passive importer. It is establishing itself as a strategically autonomous global supplier, expanding its geopolitical influence while balancing a complex web of legal, technical, and diplomatic risks.